In 1888, a killer stalked the streets of Whitechapel here in London. He killed and mutilated his victims in the most grisly way. He was probably the most notorious killer of all time, and yet we do not even know who he was.
These horrific killings of women living in deprivation, often as prostitutes, have generated a library of speculation since the tabloid newspapers of the day became so gripped by the image of an evil predator prowling the streets. Because of the gruesome mutilations that were the signature of these crimes, he quickly became known as Jack the Ripper. Experts have proposed with confidence a great mix of culprits, from impoverished immigrants to royalty, society figures to minor criminals. But what few have done is to look closely at where the murders happened and in what sequence.
An entrail thrown about her left shoulder, part of the womb, the uterus had been cut away. Besides her body was discovered a leather apron.
Today, the most popular London tour is the Jack the Ripper Walk. In a space of a couple of hours, ambling tourists can get to all the Ripper murder scenes. The fact that you can cover the ground walking suggests that, like many other criminals, Jack the Ripper walked between his crimes. This must mean that he had a base or even lived in the area circumscribed by his crimes. Another piece of geographical evidence that few seem to have noted is how the sequence of crimes reveals a pattern. After the disemboweled body of Mary Ann Nichols was found on the 31st of August 1888, there was a hue and cry. The people of Bucks Row and its vicinity became the centre of intense investigation. The Ripper seems to have been aware of this, because when he attacked and pulled out the entrails of his next victim just a week later, it was on the other side of Whitechapel, in Hanbury Street. 3 weeks later, Elizabeth Stride's body was found in Berner Street with her throat cut, more or less the same distance from Bucks Row as it was from Hanbury Street. The police thought he was interrupted because there were no mutilations on Lizzie's body. But when he struck again later that night, he showed once more his determination to keep away from areas where people might be more alert, by moving to a totally new area of Whitechapel, in which he had not attacked before. Catherine Eddowes was killed half a mile away in Mitre Square.
These four murders are a similar distance from each other, but in the same general area, like a disease from a common source. But in this case, they are not caused by an unthinking bacterium, but by a killer who's trying to avoid being caught.
And we come to the night of the 8th of November, with a man called George Hutchinson. This man was approached by Mary Kelly, and she asked him for money, asked him for sixpence. He refused her. When she turned round, she was approached by another man, and they started to walk away. And George got a good look at the man. His age was about 30, height was about 5'11". He said, as they walked past, he pulled his hat a bit further down over his face, and he looked at me, stern.
After this last and most horrific murder of Mary Jane Kelly, between his second and his fourth crime, an intensive police investigation considered many possible suspects, searching the Whitechapel area extensively. So if Jack the Ripper was a Whitechapel resident, why was he never found? What can we immediately say about the killer? Well, he walked to commit his crimes. He probably knew the local area and where to find his victims. He may even have been known to them. Almost certainly, he had a base in the area. By looking from above, in other words, on a map, and applying the basic ideas of geographical profiling, we can start to make sense of what we know. If John Duffy, like so many other criminals, surrounded himself with his first few crimes, if most criminals, like Barry George, operate in their own neighbourhoods, then why not Jack?
The third is 0.37 by 0.12.
As part of my early research into geographical profiling, I developed a computer program that takes the pinpoints on a map and turns the information into a sort of temperature map of where the killer might live, work or have his base. The redder it gets, the hotter the spot.
Can we just see what the...
Marion Lloyd, one of my PhD students at Liverpool University, fed the location of the Ripper's crimes into the computer, and the result is striking.
Yeah, well, that's interesting, because it's giving that sort of area, which we need to compare that with the actual map. it's really this area here, isn't it? That we're dealing with.
Around Middlesex Street.
Middle, around that sort of Middlesex Street area.
That's very interesting.
Ripperologists, writers, detectives have suggested dozens, even hundreds of suspects. Royalty, famous painters. But geographical profiling draws attention to just a few.
Where did these suspects live? One lived south of Whitechapel Road, another just north. Yet another was Aaron Kosminski, who died in a lunatic asylum. But another far more unlikely candidate as the first serial killer of modern times was a wealthy cotton trader who lived in Liverpool, James Maybrick. A diary found in 1993 purports to describe its writer's killing spree in London's Whitechapel. Many claim the diary is a fraud, including the person who first offered it for publication.
If it is a fake, it's a remarkably clever one, because it raises the possibility that Jack the Ripper was very familiar with the Whitechapel area and had legitimate reasons for being here, but that was as a transient visitor.
Maybrick led an apparently privileged life as a wealthy cotton merchant with a Liverpool mansion. But all was not well in the Maybrick household. He was struggling with financial problems, he abused drugs, probably taking arsenic as an aphrodisiac, and was violently jealous of his much younger wife. In the end, she was convicted of killing him in a major show trial